Hi everyone, and welcome to Musicians in Common Time, a podcast about the life of extraordinary musicians living in common with our time. You'll find me, Lauren Grace, talking with musicians, artists, programmers, and creators adjacent to the music industry about our daily lives, current topics, and honestly so much more. I started this podcast to record how musicians are living in today's time. This will be used in research, hopefully 50, 100, 200 years from now. I mean, who knows? But I still think it's crucial to have these conversations regardless of the year they're heard. After all, we're living in a common time together. Before we get started today, I wanted to thank you listeners for your patience with my delays. Like many of us crawling our way out of the pandemic, I'm in a great time of transition, more like transitions, plural, and we'll be able to make future deadlines in a more timely manner. With that said, enjoy this wonderful conversation and podcast exploration with talented stage manager and my good friend, Alex Griner. A bit about Alex. Alex Griner is a Princeton, New Jersey-based stage manager specializing in operatic productions. You can find Alex backstage with a clipboard in one hand and a toolkit in the other. Alex's pronouns are she, her. Her favorite book is the one in front of her, and she has numerous adorable pets at home. Please welcome Alex Griner. Thank you, and welcome to Musicians in Common Time. This musician in common time in front of me is an incredible friend and an even more insightful musician, and I have so much respect for this artist. And yes, let's take it away. Welcome, Alex.
Hello.
Hello. So, the goal of this podcast, as you know, is to just record and save more for ethnomusicological purposes what we are doing as musicians now. So, start me off with what feeds your wallet and what feeds your musician.
What has been feeding my wallet for the past 3 years is I've been a barista at Starbucks. And I initially picked that because they have great benefits for part-time employees, but my manager happens to be extremely much more understanding than most other managers about the kind of scheduling it takes to be a freelancer. So he has been extremely accommodating of all of my scheduling needs for gigs and such. Well, he's also been accommodating because I normally try to give him my schedule at least a month in advance too. That's been helpful. Good. But he has been able to change my schedule with like less than 2 weeks notice too. So, and I realize that me saying this, a lot of other people do not have the same experience with that kind of management for a corporate company. So my experience may not be exactly the experience that you might have per se.
It's not the experience I have, for sure.
Oh, no. It might be, it's very much, I realize that this is quite an anomaly. My experience is quite an anomaly for someone working in a corporate, because most people are about, like, well, you need to be here all the time. That is how I've made consistent money. Would I like to stay at Starbucks? Not necessarily. I would like to find something that brings in the money that's more very, very, very flexible. But I can support the art that I would like to make while I am early in my career.
Okay.
And then any extra, I also do pet sitting. I do like any freelance gigs I get. That tends to be like a nice bonus on top of the Starbucks if I can swing it. If not, then I just try to divvy up the money a bit more evenly.
What do you do in the music world that feeds your musical soul?
So I am, what I tend to do more now that I'm not taking as many music gigs, I am going more in the direction of freelance stage management. My background is classical music. I am a classically trained musician. I had a church job for 6 years, and I've done various music gigs throughout the years, but I found that I'm much more fulfilled being a part of the production team for, like, say, an opera or a musical, or I'm currently doing stage managing some concerts for the Princeton Festival. But that being able to support other artists and their music making is what feeds my soul and spurs me to keep continuing doing what I do.
Thanks so much for sharing. Appreciate it. In regards to your feeding your soul, it seems you're in the management part of it. How would you define your role as a stage manager?
It depends on the production. So for most of the stage management gigs I've done so far, they've been very small productions where I've been put on like a cap for like a production assistant or an assistant director / director of like coordination or something like that. And I'm putting air quotes on this because when I had those specific titles, I ended up doing like 10 other roles besides those titles because the productions were so small. And then the later productions that I've done, like more recently before the pandemic, it was much more like a more traditional stage manager role that you would think of in theater, where you're in charge of making sure everything's running on time, making sure the schedules are coordinated, making sure you're communicating. You're like, as a stage manager, you're the epicenter of communication for the entire production. So like you're in constant communication with the production team, the cast, the art musicians that are brought in, you're in contact with them. And with this gig for the Princeton Festival that I'm currently doing right now, they are working with a professional TV film crew. So that role as the stage management is very different in that world versus in necessarily theater. So like what some of the similarities are that I'm in communication with front of house to see how they're doing, how full the house is, like what time do we need to start by. Because we're live streaming all of the concerts, the heads of the company are saying, no, we need to start on time for the people that are live streaming this, which is, again, different than what we normally do. We normally hold for about like 3 to 5 minutes for coming audience to come in. But I'm doing much less show calling, and the production crew, the filming crew, tends to have someone that calls for like the different cameras, etc. And then they give me some instructions for this particular concert series, cueing them on, cueing them off sometimes, but also being the guy with the mic when they have to speak between pieces, and sort of being that voice between the musicians and the production crew of what they need the musicians to do and what the musicians need from them. For example, the first 2 concerts we did were Baroque chamber concerts. And a big part of that is that they have period instruments with the gut strings. And our first concert ended up being completely indoors because we had rain outside. But the second one was partially the musicians were indoor, but the audience were outside because they were able to swing it so that they could open doors so that the audience could hear everything. But because of the humidity from outside was negating the AC inside, they were having to tune their instruments far more frequently. And we actually did end up starting the concert late because the other instruments couldn't tune until the harpsichord was fully tuned.
That makes sense.
Which the TV and film, production crew did not understand. Why couldn't they all tune beforehand? Listen, it takes a full half hour for the harpsichordist to tune the harpsichord, and then the other instruments have to tune to the harpsichord. So it's being the epicenter of communication still rings true for what I'm doing right now with this particular production, but it really does change dependent upon the needs of the production.
I've always been fascinated with how we transfer the music we communicate to others, and I have always seen it as the music we communicate is the picture and the frame and the nails and the glass surrounding that picture is the work behind the scenes is the scene setting itself, it's the seats in the theater, and it's the programs, the written words in the programs, and it's the physical words we speak in between times of music making. How have you learned strategies, how to communicate with people who are more skilled in communicating through song to people who only communicate through spoken word?
Honestly, the fact that I am a trained musician myself and have been a performer in the past has really helped in terms of communicating with performers versus tech people, because even though I'm naturally a bit more like logical and in the moment thinking, because of that experience as a musician, I'm able to help them. They, especially if they know that I am a musician, they feel a bit more comfortable talking to me about certain things and certain needs that they need met, versus walking up to a regular tech person. That and also, ironically, working at Starbucks, learning, having experience in customer service, knowing how to handle different personalities, especially when they're cranky and need caffeine,
Yes,
has taught me a lot. Probably equitable to a psychology course, without the terminology. Lauren almost spit out her tea. I'm so sorry, dear.
I sat in my chair. Oh my god. God, it's so true though. Yes, I'm sure anyone who works in retail or the food industry understands. Yes. We feel
I
you.
probably still need to take a psychology course because I feel like that would be helpful, but working in customer service I think might be equitable to that.
Probably. I mean, oh my goodness, yes. Wow. So you just think it's from building experiences, and are there any like specific strategies that you can say, conflict resolution or maybe something preventable, et cetera, et cetera? Is there anything that you can like pass along to anyone else who works in a place where there are multiple different levels of roles in a workplace, much like yours?
Honestly, just keeping the lines of communication open
Okay.
is the number one thing. And honestly, it really helps me, maybe not necessarily in life, but I don't have much of an ego, just in general, or that is also me being, it could be my inexperience as well, because I'm a young emerging person, but it helps that I don't let my ego get in the way of things where like someone's communicating or someone else is trying to do like my job or whatever. I'm just like, okay, thank you for communicating that, let's just pivot and make sure you tell me so I can make sure the right people or the information is getting to the right people. Because bottom line, a lot of the issues that I've had in most productions is when the lines of communication are not clear, and the information that needs to be communicated is not getting communicated to the right people.
Okay.
Just production wise.
Okay.
And a lot of that's just being honest and frank about keeping those lines of communication open, and being honest and frank about what you need from the communication itself too.
Okay. So constantly saying, here's what I need, here's what everybody else needs, here are my expectations. Okay. I see. And when you mean getting the ego out of the way, do you mean taking your opinion of the situation out of the way, or not taking it personally when there's a problem? Or...
Both.
Okay.
I mean, if the problem's with me, I will instantly own up to it. Like I'm not someone that's gonna be like, oh no, the problem's with someone else. If I realize I'm the problem, once I realize I'm the problem, I will make strides to fix it. Sometimes it might just take me a while to understand that I am the problem.
So the priority is always for the betterment of the group, not the face of the individual.
Exactly. Like I it might just be how I am, but I don't understand why you would let your ego get in the way of having a good production and making sure that, like, for me, like, having your ego get in the way of, like, say, making sure the performers are comfortable with what we're doing, mm-hmm. or that we're doing things in an equitable way for everybody. I just don't understand how you could let your ego get in the way when everyone works better together when they're all comfortable with what they're doing, when they're comfortable with the people and the setting that they're in. Mm-hmm. As in Starbucks, as is with artists, like, you need to take the time, everyone needs to take the time for themselves to make sure that they're in a good place to create the art or do the job that they're there to do. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to end up with a good resulting end product.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that sounds very difficult to me, not gonna lie. Because there are just some days, and I'm sure you and everybody listening can relate to this, where you just get up and you're like, no. And it's not because everything's going on in your personal life or something's happening in that professional arena that's just preventing you from resetting and getting into that mode of putting on that role, putting on that uniform, as it were. How do you find the ability to reset? What can we do to better reset in a mindset? Especially because, I mean, when we think about it, when we are in a profession where we interact with other people, i.e. in your barista position, or when we're also trying to dig from a deeper place to create more earnest music, how do we find that place to reset to? What is there anything that you can? I have some of mine, but that I have learned to do. But is there anything that you have also?
That's a really great question that I don't have great answers for, because I'm someone that internalizes a lot. Okay. And I just tend to internalize until I'm overloaded, and then it just comes out. I haven't developed, before COVID, I did not develop good work-life balance structure. And because I didn't develop that, I also have not developed good coping skills for when that internalization becomes overloaded and comes out. A big problem in the theater industry is that the stage managers often look to as sort of the HR person, or the person that fixes all the problems, and the person that's always calm, cool, and collected. And that's literally impossible for anyone to do. And especially knowing that I have to, quote unquote, have to be that person. It's a lot of pressure. I am working on developing those coping skills in the moment. A big one is, if you notice that there's an issue in the room, you take a break. Okay. That's the best thing you can do. If you notice everyone in the room, or if there's a problem, I had a singer have a panic attack right on the stage. I was the only one that noticed it, so I quickly stopped the rehearsal so that person, we could get that person down to a safe place to go on. Or even if she needed to take the rest of the rehearsal off, we gave her that option. She decided she wanted to go on. But it's knowing when to stop and sort of recollect and get everyone to a safe place. Okay. If you notice that there are issues like that going on.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes it's a very important strategy to just be able to put it aside and, like you said, box it away for temporary purposes, especially if you have the opportunity to open that box again in a safer place. Mm-hmm. And because sometimes we can't take the time, if we're driving or something, when we're in a place where it would be unsafe for ourselves or others to open up the box. Sometimes you just have to stick it away into the box and close it for now. But being able to actively recognize when something's about to happen and then cool the room and cool the person as needed, depending on the situation, that I see that's a very interesting strategy to use. For me, I've learned to find things outside to just let it all out. For me, it's painting while listening to very angry grunge music. I end up painting with a lot of red and a lot of purple. But yeah. Let's take a break for now, and then when we come back, I want to talk about working in a physical space. So we talked about working with people, but you also manage the space. So when we come back, we're going to do that. So I'm back with Alex Griner, stage manager, barista extraordinaire. And I want to talk to you about managing a space, a physical space. Especially now that we are moving out, hopefully, of a pandemic. What can you predict performance spaces to be within, let me say, 5 years?
I think we're definitely going to have a resurgence in live theater and live productions, just because everyone has been so virtually focused during the pandemic. I know some people will stay virtual, and I think having the opportunity to be all virtual for about a year has definitely opened doors that a lot of places didn't expect. But I think we'll definitely have a resurgence in live performance. I think things will change in terms of safety protocols to a certain degree. I think that what's going to be, I think, the most surprising is how many people who were in the events industry don't come back because they found jobs that equally fulfill them but also pay much better. Because, if we work in the arts, we don't tend to get paid. We get paid, but we don't get paid very well, especially if you're depending upon the theater and what they're willing to pay you. But in terms of, especially coming out of a pandemic, I know people who have worked events during the pandemic will definitely be a bit more cautious. I know I am. I finally got certified as a COVID compliancy officer right before I started this gig with the Princeton Festival, and then that was also right after the mask mandate got lifted in the state of New Jersey. And then I go in with a mask on and no one's wearing masks because they're all vaccinated. It's just well, all right, here we go. But I think more caution will be taken in terms of sanitizing props or making sure if someone's sick that we take actual sick day protocols. I think a lot more people will be far more understanding about sick days than they used to be. Just because for such a long time we could not. With COVID, no one could come in to work while they were sick, just because the risk was too high. Outside of that, I don't have many bigger predictions. I think I'm more in a let's wait and see what happens.
How do you find the balance between accommodating people for the space and altering the space for people?
I don't think you can have one without the other, because I've had the pleasure of performing in the same space multiple times. I've also been in different venues where we've had to, say you're at a church. There's not much you can do to make the space accommodate the people unless the church says otherwise. But if you're doing a location-specific production like that, that's a conversation you have to have well before you come into the space to see what the space what can be done to the space to accommodate your art. And once you know how you can do that, then when you bring the people in, you are able to see how the people acclimate to the climate that they're in. And there are precautions that you take on a daily basis as a production person to make sure that the space is a safe one to be in. Such as it's common practice in theater, if you're working on a stage or anywhere, that you sweep the floors to make sure that there's nothing that someone can like step on or slip on or trip, etc. It's also making sure we have enough places for people, like a place if you're working with props, to make sure you have props, or if you're, say, doing an outdoor concert and you need access, you're singing and you need access to water, like what does that look like and how do you accommodate that? I strongly believe you can't have one without the other, because if you try to work one without the other, it doesn't, I don't think it's possible. It might be, I just can't imagine it without both.
Makes sense. It's so exciting, like, getting to be a part of your inside baseball. I just wanted to say that. Like, it's so cool. Like, I've, as you know, like, music ed majors didn't get, like, the ins and outs of being a part of a production unless you, like, auditioned for that kind of stuff. And I was too busy working with the children outside of my collegiate experience to be involved in any of those kind of performances and get familiar with being a part of a production. So that's really cool. Thanks so much.
Well, I mean, I didn't even get this experience because I was homeschooled. I didn't get any real production experience until I was working the operas at Westminster. Had I gotten that experience beforehand, I might have done things a little differently, but I don't think I'd be where I'm at if I hadn't gone to Westminster Music School and been able to just experience things the way I have. So a lot of my production experience is literally just on the job and just finding out I did something and don't ever do that again. Or I did something and was like, yes, that's correct. Keep doing the thing. So it's for me, it's been a lot of trial and error and just figuring things out on the go. There are now more resources. I found way more resources during COVID than I ever cared to try and Google before the pandemic, but which is great for people who want to get into stage management or at least know more about it.
What are some of those resources?
So there is a YouTube channel. It's called Half Hour Call. And it's specifically geared towards being a free resource for people to learn stage management. And it talks about some of the things that, like, people want to know, like, what are the finances about? Like, what are some of the more big picture things that you look at that wouldn't necessarily fall just to the stage manager, but would help stage managers figure out how to do things like negotiate contracts, etc. They also go through a lot of paperwork examples, which is, for me, great, because being that I come from a background of being a classical musician and not a theater person, knowing how to do paperwork's one of my downfalls, is that I oftentimes have to come up or create my own paperwork on the spot. Mm-hmm. And I have found books now that are helpful, that have paperwork examples, but having something I can watch and go back to reference, as well as having those books, is very helpful. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of different books on stage management. Again, more than I thought there were. And those have been incredibly helpful.
Okay.
As well. And there is a grassroots movement called Year of the Stage Manager that I've been following. It used to be just Year of the Stage Manager 2020. They extended it for 6 months because of COVID, so it's Year of the Stage Manager 2020/21. They've done a lot of webinars with different stage managers. They've actually, since Black Lives Matter came up, they've done a lot in terms of trying to train people to be more aware and equitable towards BIPOC or other people of color. I found out what native lands I live on, and just sort of trying to navigate how to be equitable and diverse through that. There's also a national organization called Stage Managers Association. It is something that an association where you have to pay for a membership, but they do have different tiers. They have things that are available to the general public, but in order to gain more access, in case you are interested in becoming a stage manager or are already a professional stage manager, you do have to pay a yearly subscription in order to get things like that. There's also another organization called USITT, which I think is United States Institute of Theater Technology. And that's more geared towards the technical side of theater, which is not helpful because, again, as someone with that does not have a technical theater background, it's helpful for me to learn what other people do in the theater. There's even a book called Technical Theater for Non-Technical Theater People, which I am reading right now, and it's been great for me because I'm finally learning all of the different, like, I've seen the different aspects of a production, but learning like the nitty-gritty and what everyone's supposed to be doing and such has been very helpful. But USITT does have resources for stage managers, just maybe not as many as the Stage Managers Association. Okay. But it's also like an organization where you do have to pay into it to get the full benefit.
Thank you so much for sharing those. Appreciate that. I'll have links in the description for these books, resources, organizations, because I think it's important, even if you aren't going into stage management, aren't going into technical theater, I think it's important to have those resources on hand because everybody knows somebody who's probably going to need it. Or it's always good to learn new things and have a better understanding, even if there's one or two items that you take away from it, better understanding of the production. I know, as someone who teaches music and is likely eventually going to be responsible for a musical theater production, there's probably many things I need to learn from those books. So, yeah. All right. Wrap-up questions. 1. You are on a theater production that's on a cliff, and it's your job to manage that production. And if you don't successfully manage the production, it falls off the cliff. What production do you pull out of your hat?
Is it a production that I've already done? Or
it can be. Whatever one you're like, this one is in the bag. I got it's in my tool belt. I got this.
Honestly, Hansel and Gretel, because if I'm on a cliff, I would want something that has a small cast. That does have a small cast, and there are editions of it where you can cut out like the children's chorus because that's the largest part of it. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's a very good one to do if you're on a cliff. You probably don't want like a huge like Broadway production of something Broadway sized.
Unless it's like in the sky or something.
Right. That Hansel and Gretel by Humperdinck is something that can be very flexible to the needs of the space, I've found, because I've done it in different. That's one of the operas I've done multiple times in different spaces, and we've been able to adapt it very well.
Okay, cool. Could I have maybe, if you can't pick one, maybe top 5 bucket list performances you would like to eventually be a part of?
Honestly, a lot of my bucket list productions would be probably pieces I haven't heard of yet, just because as a musician and also spilling into being a stage manager, I really enjoy working on newer works and newer productions. Even though I do hold a love in my heart for the classical canon.
It gets a very comfortable seat cushion.
It's a very comfortable seat cushion. A lot of people, like 99% of people out there in the opera world, make their bread and butter off of the canon, and that's great. I want to take more risks. I also don't want to necessarily settle too deeply in opera. I'm interested in doing like theater or straight theater or musical theater or even dance, because those are things I believe in. I want to learn all of the things, and I believe that in order to be a well-rounded stage manager, I should at least have some experience in some of the things. I would like to experience the different things because I like seeing the contrasts and the similarities between how you manage those different entities, because stage managing an opera is a completely different animal than stage managing a straight play, because you're working with the cast is like much smaller. You're not having to manage like a full-blown orchestra, et cetera, but those with that comes more like different nuances between the performers and the production team, etc. So I would say a lot of my bucket list things would be newer productions and or like, for example, I would love to do a dance production of Rite of Spring because first of all, I love that piece. But secondly, I think it would be really
so cool. It would be awesome.
It would be really, really cool to do that. So,
Rite of Spring, but entirely with recorders.
Rite of Spring, but
How much do I hate everything?
Rite of Spring with hip hop, though.
Ah, so good. I am like, oh my god, yes. Well, thank you so much for being on here. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this.
I hope you enjoyed this meaningful conversation I had with Alex Griner as much as I did. If you're interested in partaking in this podcast yourself or know someone who might, please reach out to me through my professional email linked in my page description. My musicians and listeners alike, I encourage you to keep listening to each other in this common time, and we will get through this together. Have a wonderful day.